Hello students, and welcome to the video for the syntax and thesis mini lesson. If you look at our agenda, I'm going to define syntax. We'll see syntax in action. I'll demonstrate how to analyze the use of syntax, right? Moving beyond simply noting that it's there. And then we'll move into defining what a thesis is and demonstrate how to construct a thesis. So what is syntax? Syntax is the purposeful construction of a sentence or sentences in close proximity to one another. In other words, syntax is when authors write long or short or repetitive sentences, often close together, to achieve a desired effect on the reader. A quick example. A man who is dressed in sweatpants and a rain jacket, who wears 2 double-lined face masks, who hasn't left his apartment in over 9 months, walks into a store. Another example. A man walks into a store. He is wearing sweatpants and a rain jacket. The man is also wearing 2 double-lined face masks. The man has not left his apartment in over 9 months. Which version of the story, left or right, would you keep if your goal was to build suspense? Which version of the story would you use if your goal was to basically state facts or to simply state the facts? Right? Most of us would probably use the one on the left to build suspense, and the one on the right would be about keeping the information, just stating the information plainly. So we're going to talk about why we kind of automatically already know that and why that comes across, right? That's how syntax works. So the way syntax works, right? The length and complexity of a sentence matters as far as its impact on the reader. Short sentences typically are used to draw attention or to signal a dramatic change. So for example, the girl had played soccer until sundown on this field every day for the past 8 years, but not today, right? Short sentence all by itself. It's not even a full sentence, right? It's a fragment, but that's signaling to us that there's going to be some kind of major change. Long sentences. They're typically used to provide information or to explain a complex idea, right? You can't get the whole idea across in a simple sentence, so you make the sentence longer to accommodate the longer explanation. So an example. The first thing Jill noticed after running her 100th drill, something she actually enjoyed, was that the field lights did not turn on like they normally did. Okay, complex sentence, right? Longer sentence here, right? Adding in a whole lot of extra details and information. And then punctuation, right? Punctuation impacts how quickly and clearly information is provided to the reader. So the following pieces of punctuation impact the reader in such a way that it slows them down. Commas, semicolons, brackets, dashes, and ellipses, right? The ... So a quick example of syntax. A little girl named Jill plays soccer at the park a few blocks from her home. Jill had played soccer well after sundown on this field every day for the past 8 years, but not today. The first thing Jill noticed after running her 100th drill, something she normally enjoyed, was that the field lights did not turn on like they normally did. That's odd, she thinks to herself, trying to calm the rising tide of fear swelling in her chest. Then, from the corner of her eye, a place we all know we should look when we're scared, but don't because, well, then we wouldn't be able to tell ourselves we were okay, something moved. Jill would have run, could have run, but that 100th drill, it's a killer. We will return to this passage in a moment. When you're analyzing syntax, you want to discuss what happens to the flow of the sentence. So step 1 would be to identify the type of sentence that's being used. There are 4 types. I'm going to go over those with you, right? The first type is a simple sentence, right? Jill eats pizza. Subject, verb, object. Compound sentences, right? Jill eats pizza, comma, and Max eats cereal, right? You're taking 2 sentences and putting them together or compounding them, adding them together. Complex sentence. Jill eats pizza, comma, with pineapples, of course, right? One part of the sentence is a full sentence, right? Jill eats pizza, or a main clause. And then with pineapples, of course, is a dependent clause, right? Can't stand on its own, or it's a fragment, right? So a complex sentence is when you have a full sentence and a fragment joined together. There are more types of sentences that I'll go over with you, but I'm going to put it on a different slide. Step 2, right, after you've identified the type of sentence being used, is you want to discuss the sentence type's typical use, or the way it typically functions. Simple sentences are used to basically convey basic information. Compound sentences, their use depends on the conjunction that's used to bring the sentences together, which I'll go over in the next slide. But complex sentences are usually used to convey a difficult piece of information, or something that's dynamic, right? Something that has a lot of moving pieces. So once you've identified the type of sentence and how that type of sentence typically functions, you want to discuss what the structure does to the reader, right? Discuss how the flow of the sentence impacts the reader. Does it force them to speed up or slow down? Does it force them to come to a full stop? Does it pique their interest or build suspense? Does it cause confusion, or maybe even the opposite, right? To actually answer a question and reduce confusion. So taking a look at the different types of sentences in detail, right? The simple sentence, Jill eats pizza, is just giving me basic information. The compound sentence, Jill eats pizza and Max eats cereal, right? This is used to show a relationship between the two ideas, which I'm going to go over more in detail in the next slide, right? But it's no longer just Jill is doing this and Max is doing this all by themselves on like opposite places, right? This conjunction and is kind of telling us that those two things are related somehow. So coordinating conjunctions all have a specific purpose. Some of you may remember the acronym FANBOYS, right? To remember all the coordinating conjunctions: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So let's take a look at each of those one at a time. The conjunction and is used to add information. Jill eats pizza, comma, and Max eats cereal. The conjunction but or yet is used to show a contrast or some sort of an interruption to what was normally going on. Jill eats pizza, but Max eats cereal. They both ate dinner, yet they were hungry an hour later, right? Notice the difference, right? I used a different word to combine the sentences. Jill eats pizza, but Max eats cereal. Now all of a sudden there's a judgment call in there, right? Like, so why is it that Jill gets to eat pizza, but Max is kind of stuck eating cereal? Or why is it that, they both ate dinner, yet they were hungry an hour later, right? That's showing an interruption, or a contrast to what would normally be the case, right? Normally you would feel full, and yet here they are an hour later and they're hungry again. Or is used to show a choice between two things, right? Jill can eat pizza or she can eat cereal. Nor is used to show a rejection of those two options, right? Jill doesn't want pizza, nor does she want cereal. So is used to show a cause and effect relationship, right? It is cold outside, so I put on a hat. And for is used to show cause and effect, but in the reverse order, right? I put on a hat for it was cold outside. For is a little bit, as a conjunction, is a little bit of an antiquated word. We don't typically hear people using it in common speech today, but it is something you'll see in older pieces of writing. And basically it functions the same way that we use the word because today. The difference is the word because is not a coordinating conjunction, so it's not capable of holding two full sentences together. All right. Complex sentences, right? Remember I mentioned earlier that that's when you have a full sentence and you have a fragment that are combined with a comma in between them. There are three different ways that you can kind of arrange that complex sentence, right? Without looking both ways, comma, Tony crosses the street. By placing the dependent clause without looking both ways at the start of the sentence, that puts emphasis on what Tony didn't do. If I take that same sentence, but I switch the order around, right? Tony crosses a street, comma, without looking both ways. By placing the dependent clause at the end of the sentence, it still puts emphasis on what Tony didn't do, but it also hints to the reader that something bad is going to happen. Then you have the third type of complex sentence, which is where you take that fragment with a dependent clause and you put it in the middle of the actual clause, right? The main clause. So Tony, comma, without looking both ways, comma, crosses the street. This putting the fragment, surrounding it with commas and putting it in the middle of a full sentence already is called an appositive phrase. Right, so placing the appositive phrase in the middle of the main clause draws attention to that phrase, right, without looking both ways, and also builds suspense. Of these three, everyone kind of has their own preference for which one they would want to use if they're trying to build suspense. I personally think that version 3 is the one that's probably the most effective for doing that. But consider the alternative, right? If I didn't write this information in a complex sentence and I just wrote, Tony crosses the street, he doesn't look both ways, right? Obviously, writing it using a simple sentence to write that information has a very different effect on how it comes across. There's nothing in there really that makes me feel like, Tony's life is in danger or that there's any suspense to be had. All right. The last type of sentence, that fourth type, is called a compound complex. And it's basically when you do both things, right? You have a conjunction to put two full sentences together, but you also have a comma and a dependent clause or a fragment placed in there as well. So for example, without looking both ways, Tony crosses the street, but there are no cars coming, so he lives to see another day, right? Without looking both ways is my dependent clause. Tony crosses the street is one full sentence. The conjunction but is signaling some sort of a change. There are no cars coming is another full sentence. And then a second coordinating conjunction, so, drawing the cause and effect relationship. So he lives to see another day, right? And he lives to see another day is that third full sentence. So putting all the information in one sentence slows the reader down, right? Look at all those commas, right? And the coordinating conjunction is kind of forcing you to pause. But it delivers the entire idea all at once while using the conjunctions to set up relationships. And again, when you look at the alternative, Tony crosses the street. He doesn't look both ways. There are no cars coming. Tony lives to see another day. Obviously, this one sounds a lot more dynamic than this one. Right? And depending on the situation, if I want to sound more dynamic, I would choose to write the sentence in a compound complex format rather than this simple sentence after simple sentence after simple sentence format. Okay, so let's look again at the syntax example, right? When you look at that first piece that I highlighted here, right, but not today, I want to answer the question, how does the use of syntax impact the reader, right? So that fragment signals a dramatic change, right? That danger is approaching. And it's an interruption to the routine, right? Normally, this is what would happen, but not today. Something different is going to happen. The next thing that you notice, right, in this, the next part here, is there are several of these dependent clauses, kind of like all in a row, one really long sentence. You need to ask yourself, well, how is that impacting the reader? What was the purpose of that? Right, that complex sentence with two dependent clauses conveys lots of information, and it definitely slows the reader down, but it also allows us to focus on those details, right? It lets us know that, she had just run 100 drills, that was something she normally did. The field lights didn't turn on like normal, right? All that stuff is important. It's almost like it's being chunked for us to kind of, hey, pay attention to this little part. Now pay attention to this little part. Don't forget this little part, right? It's compact for us. The next thing that you see is the use of ellipses, right? And the commas also to slow the reader down. But they have an additional purpose other than just slowing us down, right? The complex sentence uses ellipses and many dependent clauses to show that Jill is getting scared, and it also increases the suspense on our part, right? Then there's down here, when we get to the longer sentence, there's an interesting part here where there's a dependent clause, remember a fragment that's in the middle of the main sentence, that's a single word. It's just the word well, right? When you think about that, that short, informal phrase begins to build the irony and a familiar tone between the narrator and the reader. That's important, again, when you look at the very bottom, right, in that last section, right? Jill would have run, could have run, but that 100th drill, it's a killer, right? There's the anaphora of Jill would have run, could have run, right? The phrase is very close in proximity to each other, almost exactly the same, but not quite, and repeating. Then that fragment, but that 100th drill, semicolon, makes you pause a little longer. It's a killer, right? Then you're punctuating that irony at the end. And that, again, making it shorter kind of helps kind of accentuate that irony, the irony of that situation. All right. So this is not an analysis of syntax, right? The author uses syntax. The author uses short sentences to get your attention and long sentences to give you details, right? That's not analysis. This is analysis. The author uses a mixture of short sentences or fragments and complex sentences to build suspense. After a few simple sentences, the author writes, "but not today." This short fragment signals a dramatic shift in the story and that the girl is in danger. The author then uses a lengthy, complex sentence with several dependent clauses to give the reader some important information, especially a part about how the lights would normally have turned on. The extra information slows the reader down, but this is done on purpose to build suspense. The same thing happens when Jill thinks, "That's odd." The ellipses help us see that Jill is getting scared, which increases the reader's fear for Jill's safety. The narrator starts building a teasing relationship with the reader through the use of a familiar tone, punctuated by the single word or positive phrase, "well," and then finishes their teasing by ending the passage with an ironic twist. The twist stands out even more because the author chooses to write it in the form of a fragment with a semicolon. Again, slowing the reader down and helping them see the irony of the situation. Okay, this is what we're looking for when you analyze syntax. Let's talk about thesis. So what is a thesis? The dictionary's definition says a thesis is a statement or theory that is put forward as a premise to be maintained or proved. In other words, and more specifically for our English class and the types of papers and commentaries that we do, a thesis is a single sentence or two at the end of an introductory paragraph of an essay or commentary that clearly states the author or speaker's focus, as well as briefly outlining the supports used to prove his or her point. So let's look at a quick example. Right? This is actually a whole introduction paragraph, and the thesis is in blue. Let's read the whole paragraph to get the context. Ambition is a good thing, right? What if someone's ambition was so strong that it drove them to drastic measures? That's exactly what happens in William Shakespeare's play Macbeth. The title character gets a prophecy about becoming king, and he goes on a killing spree to get and keep the crown. However, he isn't the only one whose ambition gets the better of him. Lady Macbeth is just as ambitious as Macbeth. Lady Macbeth's ambition to be queen is so strong it destroys not only her husband's life, but her own. This is made clear in the scene where she calls on evil spirits to possess her, where she browbeats her husband into killing King Duncan, and when she is so consumed by guilt that she commits suicide. So let's unpack this thesis after we talk about the parts of a thesis, right? Lots of people always ask, how do I know if my thesis is good? There are 3 things that you can basically do, or 3 checks that you can do. The first one is ask yourself, does the thesis have a clear statement of purpose? Or can you tell what the author is trying to prove? All right, if they got that, move on to check 2. Does the thesis briefly outline the supports it will use to back up the author's claim, right? Or to back up that thing they're going to prove? If it has that, move on to check 3. Can you tell what each body paragraph of the essay will focus on? We're going to now take these 3 checks and apply it to that paragraph that I showed you, and specifically the thesis. Right? So again, focusing on just the part that's in blue, check number 1 was, does the thesis have a clear statement of purpose? Can you tell what the author is trying to prove? Right? The answer is yes. The author is trying to prove that Lady Macbeth's ambition is destroying lives. Right? Notice that it's a declarative sentence. Right? Lady Macbeth's ambition to be queen is so strong, it does this. Okay? Check number 2. Does the thesis briefly outline the supports it will use to back up the author's claim? Right? Again, the answer is yes. The author lists 3 scenes as supporting evidence. Right? They even have this phrase to kind of signal that they're doing that. This is made clear in the scenes where, right? She calls on evil spirits, she browbeats her husband, and when she's so consumed that she commits suicide. And then check number 3. Let me move this. Sorry. Check number 3. Can you tell what each body paragraph of the essay will focus on? The answer is yes. Right? The first body paragraph will focus on the scene where Lady Macbeth calls on evil spirits. Right? And I know that because it's the first thing listed here. I know the second body paragraph will focus on the scene where she browbeats her husband because it's the second thing listed. And I know that the final body paragraph will focus on the scene where she kills herself because it's the last thing listed. The most important takeaway for that third check, right, is whatever you write here, whatever order you put your evidence in here, that's what your reader is going to anticipate is the flow of and the order of your body paragraphs. So you always want to make sure that that matches what your actual body paragraphs focus on. A few quick notes and tips, right? So, and some of this you've already heard before, but it bears repeating. First, wait until you have fully annotated your passage and or written your body paragraphs to write your thesis, right? This is called backwards planning and ensures that your thesis matches what you actually discuss in your paper. And it makes sure that your evidence is in the correct order, right? The body paragraphs order matches the order that you list your evidence or supports in your thesis statement. Second, arrange the scenes or the evidence that you're going to be using in chronological order in both the thesis and body paragraphs, right? This reduces confusion on the reader's part who may or may not have read the book you're talking to them about or the text that you're talking about. But it also helps convey that you have properly organized your ideas. And then third, use as many sentences as you need to clearly state your claim and outline your points, but keep it brief. The most important part is brief, okay? Like I said, a thesis statement is typically 1 to 2 sentences, which is normal, but do whatever feels comfortable as long as it meets all 3 of those checks, right? And remember to save the details for the body paragraphs, right? When you look back at that sample that I showed you, right? I didn't go into great detail about how Lady Macbeth kills herself, or I didn't go into great detail about what she was browbeating her husband about, That's all stuff that goes in the body paragraph itself, right? You just need to quickly state what it is that you will be using as your evidence, right? So again, and here again, this is not a thesis. In this essay, I will prove that Lady Macbeth is too ambitious. It gets her and her husband killed. Okay, not a thesis. Never use first person in academic writing, right? It's something that you just shouldn't be doing because it doesn't come across as professional, but on a personal level, it's also just aggravating, right? Your teachers have been telling you this for years, and yet students still do it. If you struggle with this, use the commonly used technique, right? Write it in first person first, but then just remove phrases like I will prove or I think, and use whatever is left over. That usually works for most people, right? This is what you're aspiring to write when you're trying to write a thesis statement, right? It meets all three of those checks. It's clear and it's brief, right? In this case, I wrote it in 2 sentences. I could have written it in more, or I could have written it all in 1 sentence if I wanted to. But this is what I was comfortable with, and it gets the job done. And that's it. Thank you for watching, and be sure to check out the other videos, other video tutorials that I've put together as well. And good luck.